My boyfriend asked me to wait while he found himself. Then I discovered he'd already found his ex. My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 28 years old, and until 3 months ago, I honestly believed I was only a few conversations away from getting engaged. Looking back, I don't think my relationship ended because my boyfriend suddenly stopped loving me. It ended because he wanted the freedom to chase someone else without giving up the comfort of knowing I'd still be there if things didn't work out. At the time, I was completely blind to that. Ethan Brooks and I had been together for 2 years, and we'd spent the last 8 months living in a bright 2-bedroom apartment downtown. It stretched our budget, but we made it work by splitting everything equally, from rent and groceries to the endless cat food bills for our orange tabby, Machi, who somehow believed every cardboard box in the apartment belonged to him. Some of my favorite memories were the smallest ones. When we bought our couch at IKEA, we argued for nearly an hour over whether the extended warranty was worth paying for. Ethan insisted it was a waste of money. I joked that our future selves would probably thank me when the couch eventually fell apart. We laughed about it all the way home. Those ordinary moments were the ones that haunted me after we broke up because they made me believe we were building a future together. Marriage came up often enough that I stopped wondering if it would happen and started wondering when. Ethan never proposed, but he loved talking about someday. One night, while we were scrolling through Instagram in bed, he showed me a ring advertisement and smiled. I actually like something simple. I nudged his shoulder and laughed. Perfect. I'd rather spend the money on a honeymoon than a giant diamond. A week later, he sent me a picture of a cabin overlooking a lake. Imagine waking up here after the wedding. I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. Looking back, I should have noticed the pattern. Ethan loved talking about the future, but never attached a real timeline to it. Everything was always next year, eventually, or someday. Back then, it sounded romantic. Now, I realize it simply kept me waiting. 3 months ago, he came home unusually early on a Wednesday. He walked past Machi without petting him, skipped our usual hello kiss, and stood beside the couch with both hands shoved into his pockets. I think we should talk. The moment those words left his mouth, I knew something was wrong. I muted the television. What happened? He sat down beside me, but couldn't meet my eyes. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I waited. I don't think I'm ready for something this serious anymore. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. What do you mean? He rubbed his hands together before answering. I feel like I've skipped part of my 20s. Like I'm missing out on experiences. I frowned. We've been together for 2 years, Ethan. I know. I need space. I need to figure out who I am before I settle down. So that was it. Experiences. Such an innocent-sounding word. It sounded adventurous, almost responsible, and certainly kinder than saying, I don't want to be your boyfriend anymore. I searched his face. Is there someone else? His head snapped toward me. What? No. You answered awfully fast. Because that's not what's happening. Then help me understand. He leaned forward, still rubbing his hands together. This isn't about another woman. It's about me. I need to figure myself out. His explanation sounded strangely polished, almost rehearsed. There was no hesitation, no emotion, just a speech that felt like he'd practiced long before saying it to me. I stared at the coffee table we'd assembled together only 6 months earlier. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. So, we're breaking up? I think that's best. That was it. Not I want to fix this. Not maybe we can work through it. Just, I think that's best. I nodded, even though it felt like every movement hurt. Okay. He looked genuinely surprised. I thought you'd argue. What would be the point? I swallowed the lump in my throat. I'm not going to beg someone to love me. For the first time that evening, he looked uncomfortable. I still care about you. I almost laughed. People always seem to say that right after they've shattered your world, as if claiming they still care, somehow softens the blow. Instead, I asked the practical question. What happens to the apartment? Reality arrived much faster than grief. We still had 6 months left on the lease, and breaking it early would cost each of us nearly $3,000. Neither of us could afford that. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. I was thinking maybe we could stay here until the lease ends. I frowned. As roommates? He actually smiled. It'll be easier financially. We're both adults. We can make it work. The suggestion felt surreal. Less than a minute after ending our relationship, he was asking me to keep sharing a kitchen, a bathroom, and a living room as if nothing had changed. Looking back, I should have said no. But financial reality doesn't leave much room for pride. $3,000 was money neither of us had, so I forced myself to nod. Fine. We're roommates. The relief on his face was immediate. Thank you. I don't think he understood what I'd agreed to. I wasn't offering forgiveness. I wasn't offering friendship. I was simply buying myself time. The first week was painfully awkward. We passed each other in the hallway like strangers staying in the same Airbnb. He stopped asking if I wanted dinner, and I stopped wondering when he'd be home. Every conversation became polite, careful, and completely artificial. Then the late night started. One evening, it was drinks with coworkers. The next night, it was a networking event. 2 days later, he claimed he'd started taking fitness classes. That one almost made me smile. The only exercise Ethan had ever willingly done during our relationship was carrying grocery bags up the stairs, so the idea of him suddenly becoming a fitness enthusiast was almost funny. Still, I didn't ask questions. He had wanted freedom, and I was determined to give it to him. Instead of worrying about where he went every night, I turned my attention back to myself. I renewed my gym membership, started reading again instead of watching whatever show Ethan happened to choose, and reached out to friends I hadn't seen in nearly a year. Little by little, the apartment stopped feeling like the center of my world. A few weeks later, my company held a happy hour after work. I almost skipped it, but one of my coworkers looked at me and said, "You've spent enough nights hiding at home. Come with us." So I went. That's where I met Daniel Hayes. He was 29 and worked in marketing for one of the tech companies in our building. He had an easy confidence about him. He was funny without trying to be the loudest person in the room, and he had a way of making conversations feel effortless. At one point, I joked that I was probably damaged goods after my breakup. Daniel smiled over the rim of his glass. "Everyone has baggage," he said. "The real question is whether you're unpacking it or dragging it around everywhere you go." I laughed harder than I expected. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. Before we left that night, he asked if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. I hesitated for a second, then decided it was better to be completely honest. "I should probably tell you something first. I'm technically still living with my ex." He raised an eyebrow. "That's definitely a first." "It's temporary," I explained. "We're both stuck on the lease." He nodded, then grinned. "Well, at least you didn't tell me you have a secret husband in another state." I laughed. "Not yet, but if coffee goes badly, I might have to invent one." "I appreciate the honesty," he said. We exchanged numbers before heading home. Driving back that night, I realized something that caught me off guard. I'd spent nearly 2 hours talking, laughing, and enjoying myself without thinking about Ethan once. When I walked into the apartment, Ethan was sitting on the couch watching television. He looked up as I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door. "You seem happy." "I had a good evening." He studied my face for a moment before giving a small nod. "That's good." The words sounded right, but something about his expression didn't match them. For the first time since the breakup, I caught a flicker of disappointment he couldn't quite hide. After that, Daniel and I started texting almost every day. Nothing about it felt rushed. We'd meet for coffee after work, which eventually turned into dinner, and before long we were spending entire evenings walking along the river, talking until neither of us noticed how late it had become. What surprised me most wasn't that I liked him, it was how easy everything felt. I didn't have to second-guess every conversation or wonder whether I was saying the right thing. Daniel never acted like I needed to be rescued. He simply listened. One evening, while we were sitting outside a coffee shop, he asked, "So how complicated is your living situation these days?" I smiled. "You want the honest answer? I'd rather have that. My ex and I still share the apartment." "I know that part." He leaned back in his chair. "But how are things between you two?" "We're basically strangers." He nodded. "I can deal with complicated situations." He paused before adding, "I just can't deal with dishonesty." That simple sentence made it easy to tell him everything. The breakup, the lease, how awkward the apartment had become, Ethan's constant late nights, and even the guilt I'd been carrying over dating someone while still living with my ex. When I finished, Daniel looked at me for a moment before saying, "You respected the breakup he asked for. There's nothing wrong with moving forward." I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear that. For weeks, I'd quietly wondered whether I was somehow doing something wrong by rebuilding my life. Daniel erased that guilt with a single conversation. Our relationship grew naturally after that. We never rushed to put labels on it. We simply enjoyed spending time together, and somewhere along the way, I realized I'd stopped waking up with that constant knot in my stomach. Meanwhile, life at the apartment settled into an uneasy routine. Ethan was gone several nights every week and rarely came home before midnight. Sometimes it was a client dinner. Other nights, it was old college friends or another networking event. Once he even claimed he'd started taking yoga classes. I almost laughed. In the 2 years we'd been together, I'd never seen Ethan willingly stretch for more than 30 seconds, so the idea that he'd suddenly become interested in yoga was hard to believe. Still, I didn't question him. He was the one who had asked for space, and I wasn't interested in chasing answers he clearly didn't want to give. One Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen to make coffee and found him already there. He watched me quietly for a few seconds before speaking. "You've been going out a lot lately." "So have you." "That's different." I looked at him. "How?" He opened his mouth, then stopped, as if he couldn't come up with a reason that made sense. "I don't know," he admitted. "You just seem happier." "I am." He smiled, but it never quite reached his eyes. "Good, I'm glad." The words sounded supportive, but something about his expression didn't match them. I caught the briefest flash of disappointment before he covered it with another smile. It was subtle enough that most people would have missed it, but after 2 years together, I'd learned to recognize the smallest changes in his face. About a week later, one of our mutual friends invited both of us to her birthday party. I thought about staying home, but Daniel noticed my hesitation. "You don't have to go if it'll make you uncomfortable." "I know," I said, "but she's been my friend longer than she's been his." He smiled. "Then let's go. Neither of us has anything to feel guilty about." He was right. The party was relaxed, with music playing softly while people wandered between the backyard and the kitchen, talking in small groups. Daniel stayed close without making a show of it. Every now and then, his hand rested lightly against my back as we moved through the crowd. It wasn't possessive. It simply made me feel comfortable. For the first time in months, I forgot what it felt like to be anxious. Then the front door opened. Ethan walked in. Our eyes met almost immediately. He started to smile, but the moment he noticed Daniel standing beside me, the expression froze. He recovered quickly enough that most people probably wouldn't have noticed, then walked over with his hand extended. Natalie. Hey. He glanced at Daniel. You must be... Daniel! The two of them shook hands. I'm Ethan. I've heard a lot about you, Daniel said politely. I hope only good things. Daniel smiled. Mostly honest things. For just a second, something shifted in Ethan's face. His confidence slipped before he quickly covered it with another practiced smile. The conversation that followed was completely ordinary. We talked about work, joked about the party, and exchanged the kind of small talk you'd expect between adults trying to be polite. Anyone watching would have assumed everything was fine. But every time Daniel made me laugh or reached for my hand, I'd catch Ethan looking our way. He tried to hide it, yet his attention kept drifting back to us. Later that evening, while Daniel went to grab us another drink, one of my friends leaned closer. I thought Ethan was the one who wanted the breakup. He was. She glanced across the room. Then why does he look so miserable? I followed her gaze. Ethan was standing with a group of friends, smiling at something someone had said. But even from across the room, I could tell he wasn't really listening. Every few seconds, his eyes wandered back toward me. The drive home was quiet and surprisingly peaceful. Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. You okay? I think so. You seemed nervous earlier. I was. And now? I looked out the passenger window for a moment before smiling. Honestly, mostly relieved. He smiled back. I'm glad you came. So am I. By the time I got home, Ethan still wasn't back. I changed into pajamas, climbed into bed, and barely thought about the party before falling asleep. That peace lasted until 7 o'clock the next morning. My phone buzzed across the nightstand. Ethan. I ignored the call. A few seconds later, it rang again. Then again. By the 5th call, I sat up in bed, convinced something terrible must have happened. I answered the call. Ethan? For a few seconds, all I heard was heavy breathing. Then he started crying. Real uncontrollable sobbing. Ethan? I asked again. What's wrong? When he finally managed to speak, the first words out of his mouth caught me completely off guard. How could you do this to me? I frowned. Do what? You're dating someone. I sat up in bed. What are you talking about? Becca told me. She said you've been seeing him for over a month. I rubbed my forehead, trying to process what I was hearing. Ethan, you broke up with me. I know. I thought... His voice cracked again. I thought you'd wait. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I'd misheard him. Wait for what? For me to figure things out. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. You told me you weren't ready for a serious relationship. I respected that and gave you exactly what you asked for. But it's only been 3 months. I let out a slow breath. How long was I supposed to wait after the person I loved chose to leave me? You don't understand. No, I said quietly. I don't. You wanted freedom. I never tried to stop you. I didn't call, I didn't beg, and I never tried to make you feel guilty. So why am I suddenly the bad person for accepting the decision you made? His breathing grew uneven again. I still love you. The words didn't hit the way he probably expected. Not because I'd stopped caring, but because they arrived 3 months too late. You broke up with me, Ethan. I needed space. You got it. He hung up without another word. Less than a minute later, my phone started buzzing again. The messages kept coming until there were dozens of them. By lunchtime, there were dozens. Some apologized. Others accused me of betraying him or moving on too quickly. A few insisted Daniel was nothing more than a rebound I was using to make him jealous. I didn't reply to any of them. I locked my phone, turned it face down, and tried to get on with my day. At the time, I had no idea the biggest lie in our relationship was about to unravel. The rest of Sunday, I stayed busy on purpose. I answered a few work emails, caught up on laundry, took Machi to his annual vet appointment, and found anything else that would keep my mind occupied. By that evening, Ethan had sent more than 40 messages. I read them once, archived the conversation, and left it there. If he wanted another emotional argument, he was going to have it without me. Monday morning, I left for work before he was awake, or at least I thought he was. Just as I reached the front door, I heard his bedroom open behind me. Natalie. I turned around. His eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept. I think we should talk. We already did. No, I mean really talk. I've been thinking. I couldn't help giving a small smile. So have I. I'm serious. So am I. He stepped closer. I don't think we should be seeing other people yet. I stared at him in disbelief. You don't get to decide that. I think we're moving too fast. You ended the relationship. I know. I made a mistake. I checked the time on my phone. I'm going to be late for work. Then I walked out. When I got home that evening, the apartment was unusually quiet. Ethan wasn't there, and his bedroom door was wide open. As I walked through the living room, I noticed his tablet sitting on the coffee table. We'd bought it together more than a year earlier for streaming movies, and over time, it had become connected to almost everything. Netflix, Spotify, our shared photo albums, even the apartment's Wi-Fi. I picked it up to move it before Machi knocked it onto the floor. The screen lit up. A notification appeared before it locked again. Sophie. Can't stop thinking about last night. I froze. Sophie, his ex-girlfriend. The woman he'd dated briefly before meeting me. I wasn't trying to invade his privacy. I really wasn't. But before I could put the tablet back down, another notification appeared. Miss you already. A few seconds later, another one followed. Same time Thursday? My stomach tightened. Without really thinking, I entered the passcode. It hadn't changed. It was still my birthday. For a second, I just stared at the unlocked screen. As the messages synced, hundreds of conversations filled the screen. The newest conversations were openly romantic, full of flirting and intimate messages. My hands started shaking as I scrolled backward through the thread. I kept scrolling past last week's messages, then through the previous month, until I finally reached conversations from 3 months earlier. Shock has a strange effect on the body. Instead of making my heart race, everything inside me suddenly went still. The messages hadn't started after our breakup. They started 2 weeks before Ethan sat me down in our living room and told me he needed to find himself. So that was his journey of self-discovery. It just happened to involve someone else's apartment. I kept scrolling. There were photos, restaurant reservations, hotel bookings, private jokes, and plans for weekends together. Every excuse Ethan had ever given me suddenly had a matching conversation in the message history. Every excuse suddenly made sense. The networking events, the client dinners, even the yoga classes had all been lies. None of them had been real. One Thursday, he told me he had an industry mixer. That same evening, he texted Sophie, "I'll bring wine." Another Saturday, he claimed he was watching a game with his college friends. Instead, he'd written, "Can't wait until she's asleep." Then I came across one exchange that hurt more than anything else. Ethan, "Natalie still thinks we're just taking things slow." Sophie, "Are you sure she won't figure it out?" Ethan, "She trusts me." Those 3 words hit harder than every photo and every hotel reservation. He hadn't valued my trust. He'd counted on it. As I kept reading, another name appeared over and over again. Ryan's name kept appearing, and at first I assumed he was one of Ethan's friends. She was standing on a beach with another man, his arm wrapped around her waist. The caption read, "3 amazing years." 3 years. Sophie had a boyfriend. Neither of us knew the other existed. I sat motionless on the couch while Machi climbed into my lap, completely unaware that my entire understanding of the last few months had just fallen apart. After several minutes, I finally reached for my phone. Not to call Ethan. Not to call Daniel. I began taking screenshots, saving every conversation, photograph, hotel reservation, and message proving the affair had started before our breakup. I created a folder in my cloud storage, then renamed it something boring. Tax documents. Nobody voluntarily opens a folder called tax documents. When I finished, I returned the tablet exactly where I'd found it. Nothing looked disturbed. An hour later, Ethan came home carrying takeout. He smiled as though nothing had happened. "Want Thai food?" I looked at him for a long moment. The same face I'd kissed goodbye every morning for 2 years. The same voice that had promised we'd grow old together. The same man who'd calmly looked me in the eyes and talked about personal growth while planning weekends with another woman. "I'm not hungry." "You sure?" "I'm sure." He shrugged. "More for me." Then he disappeared into his room. I listened to his door close. Strangely, I wasn't crying. I'd already done my grieving when he left me. By then, I wasn't grieving anymore. I was finally seeing the relationship for what it had been, and that kind of clarity hurt in a completely different way. For the next week, I said almost nothing. I simply watched, took notes, and let Ethan keep believing I'd accepted his version of events. Ethan seemed almost cheerful. He probably thought I'd accepted his explanation and moved on without asking questions. He had no idea I already knew everything. Late Friday afternoon, my Instagram notifications lit up. A message request. The sender's name made my stomach drop. The request came from Ryan Cole, the same Ryan I'd seen in Sophie's photos. The preview read, "Hi, this is probably a strange question, but did you used to date Ethan Brooks?" For almost a minute, I stared at the screen. A second message appeared before I had time to respond. I realized I had reached the moment I'd been dreading. I could ignore him, pretend none of this involved me anymore, or I could tell another innocent person the truth. I already knew which choice I'd make. I just wasn't looking forward to making it. Ryan replied almost immediately after I accepted his message request. "Ryan, thanks for answering. I know this is weird." "Ryan, did Ethan ever mention Sophie?" I stared at the blinking cursor. There wasn't really a gentle way to answer. "Me, yes." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then returned. "Ryan, I think they're having an affair." I closed my eyes. Even through text, I could feel how desperately he wanted me to tell him he was wrong. Instead, I typed the hardest sentence I'd written in months. "Me, I think you're right." A few seconds later, my phone rang. Ryan was calling. I answered immediately. Neither of us spoke at first. Finally, he asked, "Do you have proof?" I looked toward the apartment window. Ethan still wasn't home. "Yes. I'm sorry for asking. You don't have to apologize. His voice cracked. "I need to know I'm not losing my mind." "I understand." I saved every message, photograph, hotel reservation, and timestamp that proved the affair had started before our breakup. Ryan never interrupted while the files uploaded. When they finished, the silence lasted nearly a full minute. Then I heard him crying. Not loudly, quietly. The kind of crying people do when reality finally becomes impossible to deny. "We've been together 3 years." "I know. I was planning to propose." My chest tightened. So was I. Neither of us spoke again for several seconds. Finally, Ryan whispered, "Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry it had to come from me." "So am I." We ended the call. I sat motionless for a long time afterward. People imagine exposing an affair feels satisfying. It doesn't. It simply transfers heartbreak from one innocent person to another. The next afternoon, someone pounded on our apartment door. I opened it. Ethan stood outside. His face was pale. His breathing was uneven. You. His voice shook with anger. What did you do? I answered a question. You ruined everything. I folded my arms. No, you ruined everything. I just stopped protecting your lies. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited. Ryan broke up with Sophie. I know. He showed her everything. I know. You had no right. I laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because I genuinely couldn't believe he expected sympathy. No right? You cheated. You lied. You ended our relationship after starting another one. And somehow I'm the problem? You wanted revenge. I wanted the truth. Before Ethan could answer, another voice came from the hallway. I can't believe you. We both turned. Sophie stood near the front door. Apparently Ethan hadn't realized she'd followed him upstairs. She looked exhausted. Mascara streaked beneath both eyes. You told Ryan she and I had an open relationship. Ethan froze. You told me Natalie knew. You told me everyone was seeing other people. I was trying to... You lied. I didn't mean... You let me walk into another woman's home believing she was okay with all of this. The apartment fell completely silent. Finally, Ethan looked at me. I can explain. I shook my head. I don't need another explanation. Sophie looked between us, then quietly asked, Did you really have no idea? No. I'm so sorry. I believed her. She had been manipulated too. Not innocent, but manipulated. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Ethan started after her. Sophie, wait. She never looked back. The apartment door slammed. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. An hour later, Ethan returned. He didn't apologize. He blamed me. If you hadn't sent those screenshots, if you hadn't cheated... He stopped talking. For several seconds, we simply stared at one another. Finally, I said, I have one question. What? Did you ever actually intend to come back? His silence answered before his mouth did. Eventually, he sighed. I thought maybe after I'd figured myself out, you'd still be here. There it was. That was the truth. There was nothing dramatic or complicated about it. It was simply breathtakingly selfish. You expected me to wait. I hoped, while you dated someone else. I wasn't dating. I raised an eyebrow. What would you call hotel reservations? He looked away. I made mistakes. No. You made plans. Mistakes happen once. This happened for months. He rubbed both hands across his face. I didn't want to lose you. You already did. That conversation changed something inside me. Until then, I'd been grieving the relationship. Now, I was simply preparing to leave it behind completely. That evening, I opened a folder on my laptop. Not the screenshots. A different one. Inside were scanned copies of the roommate agreement Ethan had signed after suggesting we continue living together. Ethan had actually laughed when I insisted we put our roommate rules in writing. You don't trust me? He asked. It's not about trust, I told him. It's about avoiding unnecessary arguments. The agreement covered all the basics, how we'd split expenses, keep the apartment clean, respect quiet hours, and handle overnight guests. One clause limited overnight visitors to 3 nights a week unless both roommates agreed, and another prohibited repeated disturbances late at night. At the time, Ethan barely skimmed the first page before signing it. I remembered every word. Over the next several days, I stopped arguing with him altogether. Instead, I kept records. Every overnight guest, every night the music blasted past midnight, every morning I walked into a filthy kitchen after he'd ignored his turn to clean, it all went into my notebook with dates, times, photos, and short videos. There was nothing dishonest about it. I wasn't trying to trap him. I was simply documenting what was happening. Ethan mistook my silence for surrender. He thought I'd finally accepted the situation, when in reality, I was quietly building a record that spoke louder than any argument ever could. About a week later, Daniel came over for dinner and noticed the notebook sitting beside my laptop. What's all this? He asked. Evidence. He looked at me, confused, so I told him everything. The affair, Ryan, Sophie's confrontation, the roommate agreement, and what I'd been documenting ever since. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked only one question. What are you going to do? I looked toward Ethan's closed bedroom door before answering. I'm done surviving this apartment. I met Daniel's eyes. I'm going to make sure I never have to live with him again. Over the next 2 weeks, I stuck to that plan. I stopped correcting Ethan, stopped responding to his comments, and refused to let him pull me into another argument. Every time he violated the roommate agreement, I simply added another entry to my file. Overnight guests came and went. The music kept neighbors awake, and the kitchen was left looking like no one had cleaned it in days. I recorded each incident with the date, time, and whatever evidence I could reasonably collect. To Ethan, it probably looked like I'd given up. In reality, I was building a timeline. One Friday evening, Daniel stopped by after work carrying takeout. Almost as soon as he walked through the door, Ethan appeared from the hallway with another woman on his arm. Natalie, he said with a smile. Yeah? You don't mind, do you? We'll just be in my room. He slipped an arm around the woman as he spoke. She glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable and probably unaware that I was Ethan's ex as well as his current roommate. I kept my expression neutral. Have a good evening. For a moment, Ethan looked disappointed. He had brought her through the living room expecting me to react, but I refused to give him the scene he wanted. Once his bedroom door closed, Daniel looked toward the hallway. Does he do this often? only since he realized I wasn't going to sit around waiting for him. Daniel shook his head. That has to be exhausting. It is, I admitted, but it's almost over. 3 days later, I submitted everything to the property management company. The file was 46 pages long and included the signed roommate agreement, time-stamped photographs, noise logs, written summaries, and copies of complaints our neighbors had already made. The property manager called me the following afternoon. We've reviewed the documentation you submitted. And we're opening a formal investigation. 2 days later, Ethan came home waving the official notice in his hand. You reported me? I documented what's been happening. You're trying to get me kicked out. I'm trying to live somewhere peaceful. You could have talked to me. I did. You didn't listen. He threw the letter onto the kitchen counter. I can't afford another apartment. Then you should have thought about that before making this one impossible to live in. His expression hardened. So that's it? You're destroying my life? No, Ethan, you've been doing that yourself. He stared at me for several seconds before giving me a smile that felt colder than his anger. I know how to fix this. What does that mean? You'll see. 2 nights later, I was in the shower when my phone started vibrating repeatedly on the bathroom counter. By the time I got out, Daniel had called 3 times. I called him back immediately. Natalie, he said, sounding confused, did you send me those messages? What messages? A few seconds later, screenshots appeared on my phone. Someone had used my unlocked phone while I was in the shower to tell Daniel that I still loved Ethan, that Daniel was only a rebound, and that Ethan and I had secretly been sleeping together since the breakup. I walked into the living room. Ethan was sitting on the couch watching television as if nothing had happened. Did you touch my phone? He barely looked away from the screen. No. These messages were sent while I was in the shower. He shrugged. Maybe you sent them and forgot. There was no one else here. Then I guess you'll have to figure it out. I could have argued, but that was exactly what he wanted. Instead, I called Daniel. Can you come over? He arrived 20 minutes later. Ethan looked almost pleased to see him, as though he had been waiting for the confrontation. Daniel greeted me, then turned to Ethan. So you decided to speak through Natalie's phone instead of talking to me yourself? Ethan folded his arms. I don't know what she's been telling you. I've already seen enough, Daniel replied. The screenshots, the affair, the lease violations, the fake messages, and the complaint she filed. With every word, Ethan looked less confident. Daniel kept his voice calm. You're not angry because Natalie moved on. You're angry because she stopped waiting for you. You thought you could leave, explore whatever you wanted, and come back whenever it suited you. Ethan scoffed. You don't know anything. I know you expected her to stay exactly where you left her. When she built a life without you, you couldn't handle it. The room went quiet. This isn't love, Daniel continued. It's control. The moment you realized you'd lost that control, you started trying to destroy everything she built afterward. Ethan looked at me. You're really going to let him talk to me like that? He's saying what I've been thinking for months. Ethan grabbed his jacket. You'll regret this. No, I said. I already regretted trusting you. He slammed the door behind him. The following week, Ethan filed his own complaint, accusing me of harassment, threats, and invading his privacy. Property management scheduled separate interviews with both of us. I arrived with a binder full of evidence. Ethan arrived with nothing. The manager listened to both sides, reviewed my records, and then asked him whether he had any messages, photographs, witnesses, or other documentation supporting his claims. He had none. 3 days later, the property manager's final decision arrived. The investigation concluded that Ethan had repeatedly violated both our lease and the roommate agreement. My documentation was consistent, while his accusations weren't backed by a single piece of evidence. I expected to feel like I'd won. Instead, I just felt exhausted. Then I reached the final paragraph. Management had decided that the conflict had become too disruptive for everyone involved, including our neighbors. They weren't renewing the lease for either of us. We had 30 days to move out. The lease termination fee would be waived, but we'd both lose our security deposit. At first, all I could think about was the money. None of this had been my choice, yet I was still paying for Ethan's behavior. A few minutes later, though, another feeling replaced the frustration. What surprised me most was the relief that followed. For the first time in months, I could finally picture a future where I never had to share a hallway, a kitchen, or another awkward conversation with him. I called Daniel. They made a decision. What happened? They're ending the lease for both of us. He was quiet for a second before asking, how do you feel? I looked out the office window. Honestly, like someone finally opened a window in a room that hadn't had fresh air in months. He laughed softly. I'll help you move. You don't have to. I know, he said. I want to. Ethan reacted exactly the opposite way. The moment he read the notice, he exploded. This is your fault. I kept folding another moving box. No, it's the consequence of your choices. You manipulated them. I gave them the truth. You destroyed my life. You've been saying that for months. He paced around the living room, running both hands through his hair. I have nowhere to go. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You don't even care. I finally looked up from the box. I cared for 2 years, Ethan. You made it impossible to keep caring. For once, he didn't have an answer. Over the next week, he tried to rewrite the story online. He posted long messages accusing me of being controlling, manipulating the property manager, and turning everyone against him because I couldn't accept the breakup. For a few hours, people who didn't know us believed him. Then our mutual friends started commenting. They knew he had ended the relationship. They knew about Sophie, and several of them had watched everything unfold from the beginning. One by one, his version of events fell apart. He deleted the posts, tried again with a different story, deleted those too, and eventually stopped posting altogether. Moving day arrived faster than I expected. Daniel showed up early with coffee and a rented truck, while Machi immediately climbed into one of the empty boxes as if he planned on supervising the entire move. Daniel laughed. I think he honestly believes he's helping. He always does. By sunset, almost everything I owned was packed. Before leaving, I walked through the apartment one last time. The kitchen where we'd cooked dinner together. The couch where we'd talked about marriage. The bedroom where I'd spent nights wondering what I'd done wrong. Standing there, I realized something. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like the place where I finally learned the truth. I locked the door, handed the keys to management, and walked away without looking back. My new apartment was much smaller, but it felt lighter the moment I stepped inside. There was only one bedroom, no extra space, and none of the memories that had haunted the old place. That first night was almost unnervingly quiet. No door slamming. No excuses about late-night meetings. No pretending everything was normal. Just me, Daniel dropping off the last few boxes, and Machi stretched across the couch like he'd already decided he owned the place. It was peaceful. I'd almost forgotten what that felt like. About a month later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. Normally I ignored unknown calls, but something made me answer. Hello? Natalie. The woman sounded hesitant. This is Linda Brooks, Ethan's mother. I sat up straighter. I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all. She hesitated before continuing. Ethan has been telling our family what happened, but parts of his story don't make sense. I was hoping you'd tell me what really happened. There wasn't any anger in her voice, only exhaustion. So I told her everything, from the breakup and the affair, to the fake open relationship, the investigation, and the false accusations he'd made afterward. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she let out a long sigh. I'm so sorry. For what? For what he put you through. Then she told me something that explained far more than I expected. This isn't the first time he's done this. I frowned. What do you mean? He did something similar in college, and then again a few years later. He starts talking to someone else before ending the relationship he's already in, and somehow always convinces himself he's the victim. Her voice cracked. I really believed he'd grown out of it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly added, You deserve better. Those 3 words meant more to me than every apology Ethan had ever made. I thought that conversation would finally close the chapter. It didn't. A week later, LinkedIn notified me that Ethan had viewed my profile. Then he viewed it again. And again. By the end of the day, he'd visited it 7 times. The next morning, an email arrived with the subject line, Can we talk? Against my better judgment, I opened it. He wrote that he'd started therapy and finally understood how badly he'd hurt me. He admitted asking me to wait while he pursued. Someone else had been selfish. He said he missed me, believed what we had was real, and wondered if we could meet for coffee. Then he referred to Daniel as the rebound. That one sentence told me everything I needed to know. He still couldn't accept that my life had continued without him. I never replied. Instead, I forwarded the email to Daniel. 2 minutes later, he texted back. The confidence is almost impressive. Almost. I laughed so hard, Machi jumped off the couch. Unfortunately, the emails didn't stop. Neither did the phone calls. After I blocked Ethan's personal number, he started calling from his office phone, then from prepaid numbers. The messages swung wildly between apology and anger. 1 minute, he was asking for closure. The next, he insisted I owed him 5 minutes because we'd spent 2 years together. Then he texted that he'd seen my car outside my apartment before quickly claiming he just happened to be in the neighborhood. A few minutes later came another message. Fine, stay with your rebound. She'll never love you the way I did. I blocked every number, saved every voicemail, and eventually spoke to a lawyer about what my options were if the harassment continued. A few weeks later, Daniel and I stopped at a neighborhood bar after work, where I unexpectedly ran into Ryan. He looked much better than the last time we'd spoken. After apologizing again for everything that had happened, he told me something I never saw coming. Other women reached out after everything came out. I frowned. What do you mean? Ethan wasn't only seeing Sophie. My stomach sank. There were at least 3 others. He told every one of them a different story. Oddly enough, the news didn't hurt. If anything, it gave me closure. I hadn't lost him to another woman. There had never been just one woman. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I found myself scrolling through old photos. Birthday dinners, weekend trips, Christmas mornings. For a long time, I'd blamed myself for missing the warning signs. Now I understood why. Looking back, I realized I'd missed the signs because I never imagined someone I loved was lying to me. Daniel woke up long enough to notice what I was doing. You okay? I think I'm finally grieving the relationship I believed I had. He reached over and squeezed my hand. That's not the same as grieving him. He was right. 3 days later, Ethan sent one final email from a different address. This time, he admitted to the cheating, the lies, and the manipulation, then tried to explain it away by saying he'd sabotaged the relationship because he loved me too much. I closed the email without replying. Instead, I forwarded it to Linda, just as she'd asked if he contacted me again. Her reply came an hour later. We're getting him professional help. Thank you. And I'm truly sorry. I never contacted Ethan again. Some stories don't need one last conversation. Sometimes the healthiest ending is simply choosing silence. These days, Daniel and I are taking things slowly, and Machi still insists on sleeping across my keyboard whenever I work from home. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight, but I did learn one lesson I'll never forget. When someone tells you they aren't ready for commitment, believe them. And when their actions show you who they really are, believe those actions the first time.